What's up, everyone? Let's talk free agents. What an insane first day of free agency, second day of free agency, also rounding out now. We have some huge signings to talk about and how they affect the fantasy football landscape. We thought the coaching carousel was crazy earlier this offseason. The running back carousel is even crazier. Day one was all about running backs switching teams. We had a few new running backs in new places on day two. We have to talk about Kirk Cousins, obviously, as well, but let's hit on a few of these running backs first. Let's hit some of the big names. Derrick Henry just happened. He's agreed to go to the Ravens, paired up with Lamar Jackson. Better offense, better line. Those running lanes with the threat of Lamar running just got a lot bigger for him. I've been talking about Henry and him on the precipice of falling off for what seems like a few seasons now, but he's been proving me wrong every year. He's proved that he's an outlier. He's 30 years old, but I am done doubting him. He was one of the more efficient running backs last year on a Titans offense that had absolutely nothing going on outside of him. He was in the top half of rushing yards over expectation last year. He was still up there in terms of yards after contact. He was solid in missed tackles forced. So as long as he stays healthy, I still see him being a fantasy RB1, especially because Gus Edwards was tied with Raheem Mostert last year for the most carries inside the 5-yard line. So the touchdowns are coming once again for King Henry. The Bengals brought in Zack Moss in a 2-year, $8 million deal. Nothing crazy, but it was significant because reports immediately came out saying that the Bengals released Joe Mixon. He ended up actually being traded on Tuesday morning to the Texans instead. Let's start with the Texans, all right? We already know Dameon Pierce doesn't fit this scheme. He was third worst in rushing yards over expectation per attempt last year. So as of now, Joe Mixon is the guy for Houston. I do think they are still in the market for a rookie running back. Why? Because I think they can get a solid one on day three, number one. But also, Joe Mixon is definitely not their future, right? And Pierce is also not their future as well. You can't even ask him to plug in right now if Mixon gets hurt. And by the way, Mixon, he's going into his age 28 season. He gave you 0.02 rushing yards over expectation last year, which means he was giving you like exactly what you were expecting on runs. Nothing more, nothing less. That means replacement level, okay? There were 23 running backs last year who had 200 or more carries. Joe Mixon was second worst in missed tackles forced per attempt and third worst in yards after contact per attempt. And by the way, he was also dead last in each of those categories the year before. Can volume, as the RB1 of a good Texans offense, save him? Of course. Volume trumps all. But this isn't someone I'm holding on to in Dynasty. This is the opportunity to move him. And it's also why I think it's possible they still bring in a running back this coaching staff actually wants from the NFL draft. Just saying that it's possible. So let's move to the Packers for a second and we'll get back to Zack Moss. So apparently the Packers asked Aaron Jones to take a pay cut. He was due $17.5 million in 2024, which is obviously pretty unreasonable for a running back, let alone a 29-year-old running back who will be turning 30 in December. He said no, so instead of trying to work it out with him, they go ahead and bring in Josh Jacobs on a 4-year deal. He gets a signing bonus up front, but this really is just a year-to-year deal the way that it's structured. And they go ahead and they release Aaron Jones. Okay? Not ideal for Packers fans, and then it gets worse. He ends up signing with the arch nemesis, Minnesota Vikings. True revenge type of stuff here, right? We'll get to see a couple of revenge games this year. Aaron Jones becomes the RB1 for the Vikings and is looking like a decent RB2 going into the year. Some risk there given his age and quality of the offense, but they do have good offensive coaching there. Is Ty Chandler involved at all? Maybe a little bit, and maybe he gets some opportunity if Aaron Jones gets hurt. But I want to say something about this, okay? You should not be holding on to your Ty Chandler shares, your Chase Brown shares, your Zamir White shares even. It's looking like he's the RB1 in Vegas right now, but don't hold on to these super slim chances that a team goes into the season, with these type of guys being their starters. These teams don't have anything invested in these day 3 running backs, especially if it's a day 3 running back from an older regime. Sell them when you have the opportunity, even with the chance that they become the RB1 for their respective team. That possibility will always be there, but that chance is slim. And when it does happen, it usually isn't too long-lived. At this point, with guys like Chandler and Chase Brown, with those other guys signed there, I'm just holding them at this point. Anyway, As far as Josh Jacobs goes, he's the clear bell cow for the Packers right now. No Aaron Jones, no A.J. Dillon. Volume and a good offense might be what is going to save Josh Jacobs if he's going to be as inefficient as he was last year. Check this out. And I was a little surprised when I saw this, okay? Among the 23 running backs with 200 or more carries last year, he was dead last in missed tackles forced per attempt. Dead last in yards after contact per attempt. He was third worst in rushing yards over expectation per attempt. He broke 15-plus yard gains and 10-plus yard gains at the lowest rate of all of these running backs. The other concern with Jacobs is definitely not his age. He just turned 26, but he's already had 1,300 rushing attempts in the NFL. 1,500 is kind of like that threshold where we see that running back cliff, and it can hit hard. All right, this is not what you want to hear if you're a Packers fan, but the good news is that if he truly did fall off and this trend continues into 2024, you're really only on the hook for this upcoming season because of the way the contract is set up. You can move on from him in 2025. The question is, am I drafting Jacobs this year? My guess is that he's going to be a second-round pick because of his situation, right? The excitement around him, the volume is going to be there. That's clear. But I'm not sure I want to invest in someone who is only volume-based that early, all right? And we'll see. You know, I think third round might be more appropriate. Maybe I'll be more willing to do that. I guess it depends on who's on the board. All right, we got a few more signings to go over. Let's talk Austin Ekeler going to the Commanders. Brian Robinson most likely still their lead back. The money wasn't all that big for Ekeler at all, but Cliff Kingsbury runs the air raid, right? There's no doubt running backs are going to be involved in the receiving game. This was actually my landing spot prediction for Ekeler pre-free agency because of that. And I think Ekeler gets used a little bit more than Antonio Gibson was used last year alongside Brian Robinson. I think Ekeler has a shot at being a PPR RB2 depending on his role. I'd assume it's Brian Robinson at the goal line, even though Ekeler is a very good goal line back. I'd assume Robinson is also the primary early down back with Ekeler mixing in on early downs, to run some routes, make some plays in the receiving game. Robinson is probably a touchdown dependent RB2, but there is some upside of him running some routes, right? Low key right here, Robinson was fourth among the 33 running backs with 30-plus targets and yards per route run last year. Does he get some of that work like James Conner did under Kingsbury? Is Ekeler washed, right? There could be some untapped upside here for Robinson in this offense. We'll see. I mentioned Antonio Gibson. He got signed to New England. Nothing super significant in terms of the deal, but I do think he ends up taking some of the receiving work away from Ramondre. I think this is still going to be a run-heavy offense in New England, and we'll be reviewing their new offensive coordinator and play caller Alex Van Pelt very soon on the pod. We're going to be doing a bunch of those soon as this week or next week. Let's get through free agency first. But I think Ramondre will get spelled here and there by Gibson, similar to what we saw in Washington between Robinson and Gibson. Enough where, it would kind of annoy you, right? I do think Ramondre is a better player than Robinson, and I do think the run game is going to be established through Robinson. So I'm not overly worried, but, Zeke did take some work away in the run game last year. I don't think Gibson's going to take as much work away. I do think that there will be a cap on Stevenson's receptions, maybe around 40 or 45 or so, as long as Gibson's healthy, right? And given the fact that this might not be the best offense in the world, Stevenson will probably be at RB2 at best. All right, let's talk about Saquon Barkley. Amazing landing spot with the Eagles. Giants fans aren't happy. I get it. But hey, he got his bag. You can't blame him for that. Okay. He went from a terrible offense with one of the worst run-blocking offensive lines to, even without Jason Kelce, one of the better run-blocking units in the NFL. The quality of the offense is obviously also a complete 180. 0.39 yards over expectation per attempt for Barkley last year. That's what you want to see. He did a lot better than an average running back would have done in his shoes. Despite the challenges, he was still breaking off 10 and 15-yard runs at a very solid rate. He was right behind Breece Hall in percentage of his runs going over 15 yards. Will the Eagles continue to run the tush-push without Jason Kelce? Yes, I think so. Will they be successful? I do think so. Will Barkley get more red zone and near goal line opportunities regardless? Yes, I think so. He's not the type of back that only needs to be near the goal line to score. I think he has top 5 upside, pretty easily based on his skill, zero ambiguity of who the every down guy is, and the quality of the offense and offensive line. Devin Singletary is the guy replacing Barkley for now in New York. He was with Brian Dable in Buffalo. He has stretches where he was running 70% of snaps. He led the league in routes run for like 2 years in a row, although he wasn't targeted at a high rate. He could end up being deployed similarly if they don't bring in anyone else in the draft. I think it's still possible that they do that. I think they should still do that, but they do have, a lot of other holes to fill in the draft. Singletary is in the low-end RB2 conversation as of right now, assuming things go into the season as is, but as we know, it's still very early in the offseason. We were all excited, at least I know I was excited for Tyjae Spears to potentially get some more opportunity this year, maybe even be the lead back. He was extremely efficient in year one behind Derrick Henry. He was 11th in yards after contact per attempt, 4th in missed tackles forced per attempt, and 9th in yards per route run. You look at what he did in college, very similar. So this isn't new for Tyjae Spears. He's just doing it at the next level. Tony Pollard was also that kind of guy when running behind Zeke Elliott, extremely efficient, and he gets the entire workload now. Apparently isn't 100% to start the year. Towards the end of last year, he got a lot better, a lot more efficient. So now these guys get to be paired with each other, likely with neither of them taking on a workhorse role. So they get to be fresh, right? They get to do what they do best, and they don't necessarily have to be put in a role they might not be comfortable with or might not excel at. The offensive line for the Titans wasn't good last year, but they signed Cushenberry at center. They're now running behind a Bill Callahan coached offensive line, which is key. Some might argue is more important than the names on the line. But yeah, this is an ambiguous backfield in terms of which guy is the guy that you want. I'm personally waiting until the ADP settles a little bit, probably go with the cheaper guy. If they're both the same price, I might lean Pollard by a hair just because he's the big name free agent signing. He might get that 1A, that first crack at it, maybe be their goal line back as well. When DeAndre Swift first signed, I was really excited. He was the first big name free agent off the board, the first fantasy relevant signing off the board, and I was like, yeah, this is awesome, right? Swift is going to kill it. Swift is going to kill it. Big contract, big work. But then I looked into it, and you guys know I'm a fan. I'm a fan of DeAndre Swift, but I'm also a fan of Khalil Herbert as well. And I started to look at the numbers, and I'm like, okay, do I have to just trust that the guy they're paying a high dollar amount to is the best running back in this backfield by a good margin and that he'll get all the work, or is that talent gap closer than we think? Well, if you're a Bears fan, I don't think you're going to love what I'm about to say. And I know the Bears have a lot of holes to fill, which is why this matters. I don't know if paying Swift was the right move. They had a back on the roster named Khalil Herbert, and I'm not saying he should have been their workhorse, but the delta between what they're paying these two guys is significant, right? And mind you, Swift was playing behind a very good offensive line last year, PFF's third highest run blocking unit. Herbert was playing against a not so good offensive line, PFF's 23rd highest run blocking unit. Swift saw 8 defenders in the box 18% of the time, while Herbert saw 8 defenders in the box 32% of the time, which was 5th most among qualifying running backs. Despite those challenges, here are the numbers. Among 49 running backs with 100 or more carries, this is what we're looking at. Yards after contact per attempt. Advantage Herbert. He ranked 18th compared to 45th for Swift. Missed tackles forced per attempt. Advantage Herbert. He ranks 6th compared to 24th for Swift. Yards over expectation per attempt, advantage Herbert. He ranked 18th compared to 37th for Swift. PFF run grade last year, advantage Herbert. He ranked 14th compared to 36th for Swift. I don't know what else to say. Just insert the Oprah shrugging shoulders meme here. I'm not saying that Herbert is the guy who's going to be the lead back here, but I am saying that it's possible at some point this season that we see a closer split than the money would suggest. Another thing to consider is that the best pass blocking running back in this backfield is Roschon Johnson. That makes things a little bit more complicated. I do think Swift is a very talented running back. I do think he's very talented in the receiving game specifically, and he wasn't schemed up as much as I thought he would be in Philly in the receiving game. With Caleb Williams coming in, who isn't going to just take off and run as much as Jalen Hurts or Justin Fields, we could see more targets go to the running back. Okay, that's the hope, and I'm hoping that's why they signed him. Kirk Cousins going to the Falcons is huge. He should be good to go by training camp, I think. But after what we just went through with Atlanta and what Atlanta Falcons fans just went through, these big-name players being drafted so early, Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, hopefully healthy this year, the big takeaway is that this offense is going to take a big step forward. Zach Robinson bringing that McVay-style offense over 11 personnel, bunch formations, loving this for Drake London. He will be targeted. He will be prioritized. He deserves a 27%, 28% target share, okay? He is in line to break out as a top 12 fantasy wide receiver this year. A true fantasy wide receiver one that you start every week with confidence. This is all we were asking for, okay? Let the elite guys be elite. 2.07 yards per route run for London in his rookie year was 11th in the NFL, not among rookies, among all wide receivers with at least 100 targets. 1.87 yards per route run this past year was a damn miracle in that offense. I'm just hoping his ADP doesn't get out of control. And I don't care what anybody says. Kyle Pitts is a buy-in dynasty still because I don't think enough people, even people who have him rostered, believe in him. He's still 23 years old. He's the same age as Sam Laporta. He's younger than Trey McBride. He has a 1,000-yard season under his belt as a rookie. He was banged up last year. He even came out and said it in a limited offense the last 2 seasons. Let him breathe. Let him live. Prove all the doubters wrong. And I don't care if I'm on an island on this. I really don't. The quality of the targets are going way up. Pitts had the worst catchable target rate in the NFL over the last 2 years among all tight ends, and we now have a guy at quarterback who is going to give them not just more targets, but more catchable targets. And of course, Bijan, he had 8+ defenders in the box on 20% of his attempts. Kyron Williams last year in this offense that they're trying to bring over, only 3% of his attempts had 8+ defenders in the box. That was the lowest in the NFL. The Falcons had PFF's 7th highest graded run blocking unit, who, by the way, each of those 5 starting O-linemen are returning. They now have a quarterback to be multidimensional. I love it. By the way, I like the Darnell Mooney signing too. He stretches the field opposite Drake London, clears it out. They've always had that field stretcher, and he plays that role. They brought in Van Jefferson last year, former Ram, but he's a free agent now. I do think Mooney has some game in him, and I think he was in a non-ideal situation in Chicago last year, especially coming off that season-ending ankle injury that he suffered at the end of 2022. Now let's talk about the Vikings losing Kirk Cousins. Not ideal. They've brought in Sam Darnold. Many around the league just think that he's unlucky with the situation that he was put in early in his career. I don't know about that. I'm a Jets fan, so I probably agree. But this isn't necessarily an ideal situation for Justin Jefferson, right? He was an elite wide receiver with Kirk Cousins. He's still an elite wide receiver, obviously, but I'm not drafting him over CeeDee Lamb. I'm not drafting him over Tyreek Hill. I'm not drafting him over Christian McCaffrey, okay? He was in that conversation if Cousins returned, but not anymore. We saw Addison struggle without Cousins, and we know that Hawkinson was also getting some crazy target share from Cousins as well, and now he's coming off the ACL and MCL injury. My guess is that they trade up into the top 10 to grab J.J. McCarthy, and they roll into the season with a rookie and Sam Darnold. Gardner Minshew was signed by the Raiders. What he got was backup quarterback money that can be starter money when called upon. If Minshew ends up being the starter there for some period of time, at least we have someone who can hold it down for Devonta Adams, right? Similar to how he held it down for Michael Pittman. Pittman was close to a 30% target share last year, and Adams would deserve something similar, right? We'll see if the Raiders end up with a quarterback in the draft, and we'll see if they allow Minshew to start while the rookie gets acclimated to the NFL. The Chargers are going to have a run-heavy offense. Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman, they've done this before. I get that Justin Herbert is there. I totally understand that. But Greg Roman brought in his boy Gus Edwards from their days in Baltimore together. He's their RB1 at the moment. You have to imagine they bring in another back in the draft, potentially reunite with Blake Corum on day 2 or day 3. I do think there are better running backs than Corum in this draft class, and we'll get there. Those podcast episodes are definitely coming up, and also we have a rookie draft kit coming out on March 1st. But this indicates a potential timeshare regardless. Edwards is the backfield timeshare creator. We'll see how it shakes out. Thanks for listening, guys. Subscribe to the podcast. We're talking more free agents, more rookies very soon.